Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I thought I'd give my 2 cents on the viability of canted sights in airsoft. So canted sights have been around for a little while now and arguably have been made more trendy and super cool by movies such as the John Wick franchise, where John uses them to fantastic effect. I think you'll agree. But there's always been this underlying idea in airsoft that essentially a canted optic is useless for us. Now, that obviously goes around the fact that these are not real firearms. They don't work in the same functionality as a real firearm. We are reliant upon a hop-up chamber, which to all intents and purposes, if we twist the gun through a series of angles, is going to pull our shots all over the place. So obviously, when the gun's completely upright, the backspin is designed to lift the BB and keep it in flight for longer. If we twist the rifle through 45 degrees, the idea or the underlying metric would be that eventually the BB is going to veer swiftly to the left. But at what range does that become a real issue? Well, after heading up to the farm, I'm pleased to report that under testing, I could quite adequately still hit the target with a canted sight out at 20 meters very, very accurately. I could go up as far as 25, in some instances 30, dependent upon the wind, with no problem at all. Once I hit 40 meters, I was having to adjust ever so slightly, and I would say aim approximately half a meter to the right of the target to hit where I wanted, with the canted sight. So there is a degree of truth to this idea that the BB will pull to the left, but it doesn't happen straight away. So the whole point of a canted optic is to allow you to transition between engaging targets at greater distance with, for example, this variable zoom optic, and then engaging targets swiftly at closer range. And I would say this does exactly what it says on the tin. The transitions are swift, they are entirely viable, and they work up to, I'm going to stick my neck out and say they work up to 25 meters entirely purposefully. You have no trouble engaging targets with a canted optic up to 25 meters. Now, obviously I've shown that in the video, and there are some demonstration clips of me firing the rifle, but it may interest you to know what the other options are and why I believe this to be a genuinely good option. So as mentioned, it's the transition speed for this one. So that's the plus point and why we're looking at these today. In the other option bracket, we have the more traditional setup, like we see here on my 416. So this is essentially a holographic sight up the front, non-magnified, with a magnifier at the rear to allow us to engage targets at that greater range. What are the drawbacks of this compared to the canted sight? Well, typically, a setup like this will cost you a hell of a lot more. And I would argue that this doesn't have the transitional speed that a canted optic provides you with. As you can see, you have to transition between zoomed and non-zoomed, you have to engage the magnifier. Now, that's not a slow process, but it's not as quick as twisting the gun. Also, you have the downside of having to essentially disengage from your target acquisition. As you can see, when I'm looking down the rifle, and I will extend the buttstock slightly to make it more comfortable. When I'm looking down the rifle, if I want to change, I have to pull the magnifier out of the way, and I'm essentially blocking my field of view and thus disengaging from my target. So I'm going to have to reacquire the target, and that's going to cost me vital seconds. In terms of airsoft, it's probably not a lot, and probably isn't going to make a wild amount of difference to the average airsoft game. But for those of you who like to be as efficient as possible, it is something to consider. Now, there is yet another option we have. We can run something like this on my Bren 805. Now, this is a Theta Optics clone of a much more expensive Leopold setup, but essentially this allows us a non-zoomed holographic sight, as we saw on the 416, but we have a magnified sight mounted with a slightly lower reticle, which runs through a Z prism. The idea being that there's nothing to flip out, there's nothing to engage or disengage. All you're doing is transitioning your field of view, essentially by looking straight forward for the holographic and looking ever so slightly down for the magnified optic. This does work out price-wise, slightly cheaper than that sort of setup traditionally, but I would say probably still not as cheap as slapping on a £15 setup as we saw with the canted sight. The other downside to this is, as I say, this is a clone. The real optic would set you back 2,000 plus. This whole setup comes in at around 199, but as such, it's not quite as good, and the eye relief on this isn't as good as you would like it to be. So there is going to be a need for a certain amount of muscle memory to know exactly where you're going to weld your cheek to the buttstock and that kind of thing. It can just be a little bit more finicky to use in general. So we have other options as well. You could just run a variable optic and sort of twist the zoom, but again, there's going to be a moment of transition that's not as quick as just twisting the gun. And what you're looking for there is that transitional speed between the two optics. So I really think price-wise, effectiveness-wise, because it is effective up to 20-25 meters, this is really the setup to go for. So yeah, for any of you who are looking at getting a canted sight but worried about this idea that it's not viable for airsoft, I would highly disagree. So that's been my look at that for today. Hopefully it's been of some interest to you. Maybe it's been of some help to you. And if that is indeed the case, then as always, a like and a subscribe is always welcome, guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.